Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The photograph looks innocent enough, dusty, black and white, a man in a plain coat holding hands with a girl. They're standing in front of a wooden shack, the corners sagging, the window cracked like a spiderweb. But if you look close enough, really look, you'll feel it. There's something wrong in the way he holds her hand. Too tight, too proud, like a husband with his wife. This isn't just a forgotten family photo. It's a window into the most disturbing American bloodline you've never heard of. A man born from incest who chose to marry a 12-year-old girl, a girl who was also his own niece. This story is real. It was hidden in local records, buried under years of shame, and spoken about only in drunken whispers at the edge of town. And once you hear it, you won't be able to forget it. It begins in the hollers of Kentucky, in a place where birth records meant nothing and last names were recycled like old furniture. A place where generations folded in on themselves, where cousins became siblings and mothers became grandmothers by the time they were 28. This isn't a story about judgment. It's a story about what happens when people are left behind. When isolation breeds secrecy. When shame becomes tradition. Our subject, his name, his bloodline, and the girl he called his wife will take you into the darkest corners of America's forgotten past. Not because you want to go there, but because you need to know how far the human story can twist before it snaps. And by the end of this, you'll be wondering how many other families like this still exist, tucked away where the roads stop and the trees begin. The roots of this story stretch back to the late 1800s, to a remote Appalachian valley that didn't show up on most maps. No electricity, no paved roads, no schools, just tight hollers, whispering woods, and families who'd lived on the same patch of land for over 100 years. They didn't leave and no one came in. That's how it started. His name was Elijah Dillard, born in 1897. But some records call him Eli, others call him Junior, even though his father and grandfather shared no documented name. That's part of the problem. No one outside the family was keeping track. Elijah's parents were first cousins, though some say they may have been half-siblings. Their marriage was recorded in a family Bible, not a courthouse. No birth certificate, no doctor's signature, just a date, a name, and a blood tie that twisted into something much darker. By the time Elijah was 10, his world had already narrowed to just a few families. Every neighbor was a cousin. Every meal was hunted or grown by someone who looked like him. The isolation wasn't just geographic. It was genetic. The signs were there early. Elijah didn't talk like the other kids when traders came through. He stared too long, smiled at the wrong times. There were rumors that he wasn't right, that something in his head had never formed fully. His limbs were uneven, his left hand always clenched tight, like it was holding on to something that wasn't there. And yet, in that secluded world, he was never seen as strange. He was just another Dillard, just another child of the hills, shaped by poverty, neglect, and the unspoken rule that family stays with family no matter what. By 14, Elijah had already fathered a child. The mother was his second cousin. By 17, he had two more, this time with a girl whose name was never written down. She disappeared soon after. Some say she ran. Others say she didn't make it through a chilled birth. Either way, no one asked questions. And that's the tragedy of it. When a community collapses in on itself, the boundaries disappear. Right and wrong get replaced with what's familiar, what's available. Love isn't chosen. It's inherited. Elijah grew up believing the blood in his veins was sacred, no matter how twisted it became. She was born in the winter of 1915 during a snowfall so heavy it buried the fence posts. Her name was Clara Dillard, Elijah's niece by blood and daughter to his half-sister. Her mother died just after giving birth. The official cause was fever, but locals whispered of other things. Things you don't say out loud when you know the family still carries a shotgun in the barn. Clara was raised in Elijah's house. He was nearly 20 by then, but unmarried and already thought of as off. People said he had a fondness for Clara from the moment she could walk. Not like a father, not like an uncle. It was something else. Something you could feel in the way he watched her. Possessive, patient, like he was waiting for her to grow into something he already believed belonged to him. She called him Uncle Eli. But that didn't last. As she grew older, the house got smaller. He moved her into his room. By the time she was 10, there was no schooling, no church, no one to intervene. The only people who might have said something were blood relatives, and they'd already taught themselves not to look too closely at what went on behind closed doors. When Clara was 12, Elijah told the family he was going to marry her, not ask her, not court her, marry like it was already decided. One of his cousins protested, a man named Harmon, who'd fought in the Great War and came back with a limp and a Bible under his arm. Harmon told Elijah it was wrong, that she was a child, that it was a sin. Elijah didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just waited until Harmon's chicken coop mysteriously burned to the ground that spring with his prize hens locked inside. No one was charged. No one said a word. And after that, the valley went silent again. They held the wedding in the backyard beneath a dying walnut tree. No preacher, just Elijah's uncle muttering a few words about family and God and keeping the things clean. Clara wore a dress that didn't fit. Elijah gave her a ring that once belonged to his mother, who was also reportedly his aunt. That day, Clara stopped being a child, and Elijah became something worse than a man. From the outside, the Dillard home looked like any other weather-beaten cabin, tucked deep in the Kentucky backwoods. But inside, time had stopped. The floorboards creaked with rot. The windows were clouded with grime, and a smell, part kerosene, part mildew, part something sour, hung heavy in the air. Clara rarely left. After the marriage, she was seen less and less in town. When she did appear, she was quiet, slow-moving, eyes hollow. People said she looked older than her years, but never in the way a girl should. Elijah controlled everything. What she wore, when she ate, who she spoke to, which was almost no one. He claimed it was to protect her from outsiders, but outsiders weren't the danger. He was. By the time Clara was 14, she was pregnant. The child was born with a cleft palate and a fused spine. He survived only 6 weeks. Elijah buried the baby behind the house and marked the grave with a stone carved with the letter E. Neighbors whispered again, but whispers were all they had. No sheriff came. No doctor was called. No one filed a complaint. That's how generational silence works. It teaches people to bite their tongue so hard they taste blood. Elijah grew more paranoid. He boarded up the windows, locked the doors with chains, and began sleeping with a rifle by the bed. He was convinced someone would try to take Clara from him, but no one did. Clara gave birth again at 16, this time to a girl. Then another 2 years later, each child bore the weight of the family's twisted legacy. One with a lazy eye and a club foot, another who never spoke. Doctors today would call it genetic collapse. The inevitable fallout of incest compounding across generations. Elijah didn't care. He believed the bloodline was pure. Even as it crumbled in front of him, he taught the children that the outside world was evil, that strangers were liars, that the only truth was family, and that family meant loyalty, no matter what happened behind closed doors. Clara stopped speaking much altogether. Not out of defiance, out of resignation, out of numbness. She had become a ghost inside her own skin, not a wife, not a mother, just a vessel for the continuation of a family tree that had long since rotted at its roots. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? By the 1940s, the Dillard family had become a legend, and not in a good way. Locals called them the Hollow Hill people, and children were warned not to wander too close to their land. Some believed the Dillards were cursed. Others believed they were dangerous, but no one dared interfere. Elijah was now nearing 50. Clara, barely in her 30s, looked twice her age. The years of childbearing, isolation, and psychological imprisonment had taken their toll. Her face was sunken, her movements stiff. But she stayed, not because she chose to, because she had nowhere else to go. Their children, 3 surviving by this point, had never been to a proper school. They couldn't read. They couldn't write. They didn't even know their real last names. And that was by design. Elijah wanted to keep them untainted by the outside world. He believed the government was watching him, that city people would come and steal his family away. One of the daughters, Mabel, began showing signs of schizophrenia by age 10. She would scream at shadows, claw at the walls, speak in riddles. Clara tried to comfort her, but Elijah saw it as a punishment for what he never said. But he began locking Mabel in a shed behind the house, sometimes for days. Neighbors occasionally saw her, wild-haired, barefoot, eyes darting like a trapped animal. They'd ask questions, soft ones. "Everything all right over there, Eli?" He'd smile and nod, then grip the shotgun resting on his porch just a little tighter. One cold November night, Mabel vanished. Elijah claimed she wandered off into the woods. They searched for 2 days, found nothing but a blood-stained ribbon near the creek. No body, no explanation, no arrest. Clara wept for a week, then went silent. She never spoke her daughter's name again. That winter, something shifted. Elijah stopped going into town, stopped hunting, stopped answering the door. The house grew darker. The remaining children, mute, pale, confused, wandered like ghosts. By then, even the locals knew something was deeply wrong. But still, no one intervened. Fear kept them away. Fear and that familiar Appalachian code. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Because in that place, silence wasn't just survival. It was tradition. The winter of 1952 was the coldest in decades. Pipes froze, livestock starved, and families huddled close to wood stoves, hoping spring would come before death. But for the Dillards, something else had begun to rot, something internal, something festering for years. By that time, Elijah had become a specter, half man, half myth. People swore they saw him wandering the woods at night in bare feet, muttering to himself. Others said he had stopped speaking entirely. Only Clara knew for sure, but she no longer answered the door even when someone knocked. The family was unraveling. One child, a boy named Eli Jr., began harming animals, birds, squirrels, even a stray dog. He buried their bodies in a neat row behind the shed where Mabel had once been locked away. When a neighbor's calf turned up gutted, people whispered, but no one reported it. No one wanted Elijah's attention. But the event that finally broke the silence came in the spring. A traveling tax assessor, a man unfamiliar with the local rules, was sent to survey the land. He knocked on the Dillard cabin 3 times. No answer. Then he looked through the window. What he saw sparked the first official investigation in the family's history. Inside, Clara was barely conscious on the floor, ribs visible beneath her skin. The 2 remaining children sat motionless in the corner, staring blankly, smeared with filth. And Elijah, he was sitting at the kitchen table, fully still, eyes wide, clutching the handle of a rusted hunting knife. Authorities returned with backup. It took 2 hours to convince Elijah to leave the house. When he did, he didn't resist. He just muttered, "They can't take her. She's mine. She's always been mine." He was arrested without a fight. Clara and the children were taken to the nearest hospital. Doctors were horrified by what they found. Malnutrition, untreated infections, and signs of long-term psychological trauma that would never fully heal. Elijah was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. He was sent to an institution 3 counties over where he died 4 years later from complications related to untreated diabetes. He never once spoke of Clara again. No obituary, no funeral, just a forgotten man in an unmarked grave buried beneath decades of shame. But the legacy he left behind would haunt that valley forever. After Elijah's arrest, the Dillard cabin was abandoned. Locals said it stood untouched for nearly 20 years, slowly rotting into the hillside like the family that once lived inside it. Some teens dared each other to sneak in at night, swearing they saw shadows in the windows, heard footsteps on the porch. Others claimed to find strange carvings in the trees nearby, initials that didn't match anyone still living. Clara spent her remaining years in a state-run care facility. She never remarried. She rarely spoke. When asked about Elijah, she'd only say, "He was the only one I ever knew." Her children were split up, one institutionalized, the other placed in a group home under a changed name. The Dillard surname quietly disappeared from official records, scrubbed clean like it had never existed. But for those who remember, it never really went away. The valley itself grew quieter in the decades that followed. Some families moved out. Others stayed and made sure their children knew not to talk about the past. Ask too many questions and you'd be met with silence or worse, a cold stare like you'd just opened a door no one wanted to remember was there. It wasn't just the Dillards. That was the worst of it. Yes. But there were others. Other bloodlines touched by the same rot. Families who through isolation, ignorance, and fear collapsed inward across generations. And that's what makes this story so unsettling. Not that it happened, but that it could happen again. You see, the darkest parts of American history aren't written in textbooks. They're passed down in hushed voices, in backroom confessions, in the memories of people who still live with the scars. And when no one talks about it, when the shame is too deep and the silence too thick, it becomes tradition. The story of Elijah Dillard isn't just about one man. It's about what happens when a community refuses to look inward. When boundaries break down and blood is treated like destiny. This wasn't an accident. It was a slow descent. Generations in the making. A perfect storm of poverty, ignorance, fear, and control. And somewhere out there, in a forgotten corner of the country, a house still stands. The windows are broken. The door hangs loose on one hinge. But if you walk close enough, you might feel it. That same chill that runs down your spine when you know something isn't right. Something was born in that house that should never have been, and its roots are still buried in American soil.